This video contains spoilers for whatever I feel like talking about, so be advised. The biggest game of 2022 got the biggest DLC, and with it a continuation of everything that was positive or negative about the base game. Some things are the same, some are better, some are more egregious, and the discourse is surprisingly but appropriately mixed. Some people have really turned on Elden Ring, and some of their criticisms are resonating with the public consciousness in a way that did not really happen when the game originally came out. But let's start with what the DLC is. Shadow of the Erdtree is a $40 expansion that carries a few dozen hours of content with it, depending on your skill level and your willingness to wander around begging the game to tell you how to get to any given area you see in the distance. People say Elden Ring's DLC is more vertical of a map, and that's true, because odds are the place you're trying to reach is a mile above or below you with no path in sight. There are multiple vast sections of this map that are only accessible by finding a hidden dungeon or cave opening in a random other part of it, sometimes even behind an illusory wall or a place that doesn't open until you perform the right gesture in front of it. I am on record as not being an exploration enjoyer when said exploration involves hours of aimless wandering and perimeter checks on your horse looking for anything that seems like it might lead to content. The base game has this in spades, and the DLC, while smaller, also has more obtuse map design. I was constantly staring at this thing trying to figure out how to get down to a place, and even the online interactive map was only so much help. According to that, there are only 7 spirit springs for your horse to ascend or descend in the entire map. 7. There needs to be like 50. I have never felt so imprisoned by wide open areas before. They're like giant cages with minimal exits between each other. This design is at odds with the new leveling system because the introduction of Erdtree fragments for you to find scattered everywhere and turn into attack and defense power necessitate thorough searches of all the areas, or you're going to get mollywopped by bosses throughout the DLC that are power scaled for higher blessing levels. And yes, the beginning area has shit in it that you're supposed to get destroyed by until you come back with more fragments, because that's so awesome and I'm so glad it's a staple. Nothing I love more than getting reamed out of the gate for the crime of stepping foot in an area. The first dungeon you'll likely run into has this NPC fat-ass who poises through every attack and two-shots you, and then your first Remembrance boss fight also punishes anyone who hasn't made a beeline for every Erdtree fragment they can find in a guide. If you don't look up where stuff is, primarily the Erdtree fragments, you will suffer, more so than the base game, because you didn't have to go on this scavenger hunt to keep up in levels. You could just level up to get stronger by fighting whatever. Now you have to explore every nook and cranny if you don't want main bosses to eviscerate you the second you enter the arena. If you have a guide open, you can mitigate that frustration in a way to where leveling up your Erdtree blessing is satisfying and happens at a steady pace. Otherwise, you'll get stuck at a certain level and find that every available boss for you to fight is stronger than you by a country mile. I can go over here and get 2-shot over here, or I can go over here and get 2-shot over there. That's not to say that exploration is bad, it's actually too important now, and you're often rewarded with things like smithing stones and new weapons when you're not busy adding to the world's largest cookbook collection. There's over 30 cookbooks, and they present a lot of possible item crafting options to completely ignore. Anyone else just never craft items in this game? The DLC has not changed my tune on this. I might make stuff to cure poison, but this DLC oddly doesn't have almost any at all. There's like one tiny Scarlet Rot area in a ruin, and believe me, I am not complaining. It's just out of character for developers who love to make their players languish in environmental torment. I guess they're still doing that, but just because of the map design. The weapons are maybe the best part of the DLC. There are tons of new ones and new types with new movesets too, like better martial arts and infinite use perfume bottles and throwing daggers and great katanas, or a light greatsword named Milady that lets you dance around like a bitch. I'm excited for DLC item pools to be added to the base game randomizer mods so I can beat Soldier of Godric and have him give me a Scarlet Rot halberd or a giant finger club. They really cooked with some of these Ashes of War. These new weapons feel very distinct and cool for the most part. So how are the bosses? Let's call it a mixed bag. Half the bosses are just NPC fights with different themes, whether it's a dragon dude who looks like a dragon, or a bear dude who looks like a bear, all of them rolling around and using Estus like they're the protagonists. You'll often get good weapons or armor for beating them, but the fights themselves aren't fun. It's just PvP light mode, where your enemy is like you, but with way more health, damage, and infinite FP and stamina. It's annoying. Conversely, there are a lot of cool bosses in the DLC. I'm a big fan of animal bosses, so seeing a giant holy porcupine hippo was a highlight of my playthrough. Seeing giant spider scorpions, however, was not. Fuck those things. Actual grossest enemy FromSoft has ever put in a game. First time I saw one, I about had a heart attack. The new Remembrance bosses are fittingly memorable. There's 10 of them in the DLC, and I enjoyed/didn't hate almost all of them. People talk about the heightened difficulty of the boss fights and scapegoat a lack of Erdtree fragments as the culprit, but it's not just that. Some of these dudes are designed to make Melania look kinder than Mikola. By the time I reached the end of the DLC, I had a forlorn expression on my face like, I miss when I didn't have to do 10 full seconds of dodging before I can counterattack literally anything any of these people are doing. At least Malenia had easy punishes incorporated among her BS. I'm fighting some of these guys like, alright, here comes this 5-hit combo, now I can hit once. Now here comes this very similar looking 6-hit combo, now I can hit twice if I'm quick. Now here comes this screen-wide devastation AoE, now here comes this other screen-wide devastation AoE. It's like power scaling in anime. As the seasons stack up, they have to make the enemies ridiculous juggernauts for the hero to overcome. But unlike Goku, my training is not paying off. I'm a Super Saiyan 2, embarking on a Super Saiyan God's quest. How about you give me some screen-wide AoE one-shots, huh? How about you make the boss dodge my extended combo? I won't spoil the final boss just because there's not much point in being specific, but that motherfucker is doing too much shit. Malenia took me an hour to beat for the first time solo back in the day with no cheese. This dude took me 5 hours with spirit summons after I gave up trying to solo him. For all the difference it even made, he decimates them in like 15 seconds anyway. I was blessing level 18, I think the max is 20 or 21, but I just could not find any more fragments even with the interactive map, and re-exploring every place I'd been sounded like a nightmare. This DLC is Elden Ring Extreme Edition, and the extreme reaches absurd territory in multiple spots. But let's get to the game graph, where we're judging story, graphics, mechanics, and fun as separate categories before culminating into an overall score at the end. Starting with story. I'll wait for a YouTuber to tell me what I'm supposed to think about the DLC story after they dissect enough item descriptions. I don't care about Elden Ring's story or any Souls game, never have. The lore is there in hundreds of jigsaw pieces, but none of it ever really matters beyond deciding which ending you want to go for after you look up how to do it. I don't know if the DLC has multiple endings, but the one I got was so abrupt and lame I immediately looked up what I was supposed to do next. The answer? Nothing. It's over. I beat the most demandingly dumb boss fight in Souls history, and I get basically nothing for it thematically. I gave the base Elden Ring story an NA, so since this DLC seems a bit worse in that regard, I'm giving it a worse NA, which is still just NA. Now for graphics. I will say that Elden Ring's art direction is putting in overtime. There's some cool areas in this DLC, and the verticality of the map, while functionally horrific, does make for some nice vistas and distant rendering. Endless blue fields of flowers and spooky dangerous woods are a visual highlight, even if they're kind of empty to traverse, an aspect the DLC does not really improve on. It's not the highest fidelity stuff, but it still manages to look very good. I give graphics a 95. Mechanics is next, chief among them being the oft-mentioned Erdtree fragment system because it's integral to the proceedings. I like this in theory. I was asked about it early on in my first stream of the DLC, and my take was like, yeah, it's good because it allows you to continue getting stronger and creates a growth curve that mimics that of the base game without just relying on leveling your attributes. But again, I think that's only good if you look up where the fragments are and find them at a good clip, or else you'll be stuck for hours wandering aimlessly making no progress. It's the kind of system that benefits from player experience. The more you play the game and internalize locations, the better it'll feel. The other main mechanic to go back to is just the state of boss design in the DLC. Like we already touched on, how several bosses are just non-stop attack machines who never take a fucking break. Rolana and the Impaler dude are just combo after combo. The Impaler guy I look back on more fondly because he's cooler and he fights a bit more honestly. Rolana swings her swords where like every swing is a 1-2 punch where getting clipped by one of the hits is inevitable. Both of them have giant learning curves. I feel like bosses in the DLC are more tuned towards being impassable walls until you fully solve their playstyles and can execute near-flawless gameplay against them, instead of being able to rely on instinct and afford some mistakes while still being victorious. It's like they don't want to allow you any room for error. And again, the final boss, forget about it. Every attack in the second phase is interspersed by carpet bombs of holy damage that stagger your rolls and get you stun-locked by combos you'd otherwise easily dodge. It feels so unfair. Hell, there are normal enemies in the DLC that would give any boss from base Dark Souls 1 through 3 a run for their money. That acrobatic ring dude or the in-game Storm Knights could enter a fog wall from 2012 and ragdoll the biggest veterans at the time. We're seeing power creep in Souls games to a tremendous degree, and it's reaching a threshold where less and less people are keeping up. It makes me want to go back to the old Souls games and dog walk every boss just to regain some semblance of superiority. The AI has gotten brutal. I fight bosses solo, with melee weapons weapons. No spirit ashes or summons, and I generally don't bother with consumables other than Estus either. That's how I've always played Souls games in order to feel fully accomplished with any victories I attain, avoiding cheese strats and weapons too, so nobody can be like, oh, you didn't really beat the boss. As a person who ranks bosses by difficulty, this is obviously expected of me, but Shadow of the Erdtree's final boss broke this resolve by being abject horseshit, and in the process put a crack in my enjoyment of this genre as a whole. Maybe it's my midlife crisis talking, but I'm 30 now, and these increasingly insurmountable challenges are starting to not be fun anymore. Plenty of the Remembrance bosses still were a good time. The Putrescent Knight ran me over a dozen times, but I never felt it was unfair. The Madness boss felt acceptably beatable from the outset. The Bug Lady felt like an ode to Souls games past with Quelaag and Scorpioness Najka, and was a dangerous yet relaxed experience, so they still are making bosses that aren't fucking nonsense. I just think the difficulty fetishism has increased in severity over the years. Anyway, mechanics get a 75 for map design, boss tuning and repetition, and the Erdtree system. Now for fun. Is Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC fun? It is if you play it right, it is if you know how to get to the places you want to go, it is if you collect Erdtree fragments at a good pace and enjoy the challenge of bosses for the most part, but if any of these things don't apply to you, you're going to be miserable. Base game Elden Ring had a fun to frustration ratio of like 70-30, I don't remember the exact ratio I gave it at the time, but I would say the Elden Ring DLC is a step down from whatever that is. If base game is 70-30, the DLC is 60-40. Having so many NPC fights brings it down, having a less navigable map brings it down, and having such an absurd final boss brings it down. But if you like Elden Ring to begin with, all the same things you liked are still here. You're still getting your coveted Elden Ring experience, and obviously just like there's people who hate this DLC, there's people who think it's a 10 out of 10. I gave the base game fun an 80, I'm giving the DLC fun a 75. And now for the overall score, which is not an aggregate of previous scores because some things are weighted differently, but I'm giving Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC a 79 out of 100. For everything negative I'm mostly focused on saying in this video to vent my frustrations, it's still Elden Ring out here with some nice additions, but I also have no desire to replay this DLC ever, and I just want mods to add the items and bosses to the randomizer pool to bolster the base game experience instead. That's going to do it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can like, share, and subscribe. Watch all my other videos if you can find them in the hidden catacombs I put them in, and I'll see you guys next time.